The year was 1945. The Second World War had finally come to an end. Across Europe and Asia, entire cities lay in ruins. Millions of people had lost their lives, and countless families were left grieving. Nations that had once been powerful now faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding from devastation. For many, it seemed as though humanity had survived its darkest chapter and was finally entering an age of peace. But beneath the celebrations and victory parades, another conflict was already beginning to take shape. Unlike the wars that had come before it, this new struggle would not be fought through direct military confrontation between the world's strongest powers. Instead, it would become a battle of ideologies, influence, intelligence, technology, and fear. This was the Cold War. At the center of the conflict stood two superpowers. The first was the United States, a nation that emerged from World War II with its economy booming and its military stronger than ever. American factories had fueled the Allied war effort, and unlike Europe, the American mainland had escaped widespread destruction. More importantly, the United States possessed the most powerful weapon ever created, the atomic bomb. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, demonstrating a level of destructive power the world had never witnessed before. America now stood as the dominant global power. On the other side was the Soviet Union. Although victorious in the war, the Soviet Union had suffered enormously. Nearly 27 million Soviet citizens had died fighting Nazi Germany. Entire cities had been destroyed, and vast regions of the country were left devastated. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was determined to ensure that his nation would never again face such a catastrophic invasion. To protect Soviet territory, he established communist governments throughout Eastern Europe, creating a buffer zone between the Soviet Union and the West. To many Western leaders, Stalin's actions appeared aggressive and expansionist. Former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill famously warned that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe. The continent was becoming divided into two rival camps. In the West stood democratic nations aligned with the United States. In the East stood communist governments loyal to Moscow. The alliance that had defeated Nazi Germany was rapidly collapsing. Tensions increased when Stalin delayed the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Iran and pressured Turkey for greater influence over strategic waterways. Concerned by Soviet expansion, President Harry Truman introduced a new foreign policy known as the Truman Doctrine. Under this strategy, the United States would support nations threatened by communist influence. It marked the beginning of a policy called containment, whose goal was simple: stop communism from spreading any further. Soon afterward, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, investing billions of dollars to help rebuild Western Europe. American leaders believed that economic prosperity would reduce support for communist movements. The plan proved highly successful, helping restore industries, rebuild infrastructure, and improve living standards across much of Europe. Germany soon became the most visible symbol of the growing division between East and West. After the war, the country was divided into occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Even Berlin, located deep inside Soviet-controlled territory, was divided. In June 1948, Stalin attempted to force the Western Allies out of Berlin by blocking all land routes into the city. The crisis became known as the Berlin Blockade. Rather than abandon the city, the United States and its allies launched the Berlin Airlift. For 15 months, aircraft flew around the clock delivering food, fuel, medicine, and supplies to the people of West Berlin. The operation became one of the greatest logistical achievements in modern history. Eventually, Stalin lifted the blockade, but the crisis demonstrated just how serious the rivalry between East and West had become. In 1949, the United States and its allies formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance designed to defend against Soviet aggression. The Soviet Union viewed NATO as a direct threat. That same year, another major event transformed the global balance of power. The Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb. America no longer held a monopoly on nuclear weapons. The nuclear arms race had begun. Meanwhile, events in Asia dramatically expanded the Cold War. In China, communist forces led by Mao Zedong defeated the nationalist government after years of civil war. In October 1949, Mao proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. For the Soviet Union, it was a major ideological victory. For the United States, it was a serious setback. American leaders feared that communism was spreading rapidly throughout Asia. Those fears appeared justified when North Korea invaded South Korea in June 1950. Supported by the Soviet Union and later by China, North Korean forces quickly advanced southward. The United States responded by leading a United Nations military coalition to defend South Korea. The Korean War became the first major military conflict of the Cold War. The fighting was brutal. Cities were destroyed, millions of civilians were displaced, and casualties mounted rapidly. American and South Korean forces initially pushed North Korean troops back toward the Chinese border. However, China entered the war, sending hundreds of thousands of soldiers into combat. After 3 years of fighting, an armistice was signed in 1953. The border remained almost exactly where it had been before the war began. Although there was no clear victor, American leaders believed they had successfully contained communism. That same year, Joseph Stalin died. His death marked the end of an era in Soviet history. After a struggle for power, Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the new Soviet leader. Unlike Stalin, Khrushchev was outspoken, energetic, and unpredictable. He sought to modernize the Soviet Union while continuing competition with the United States. The Cold War soon expanded beyond military and political competition. It became a race for technological and scientific superiority. In 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. For Americans, the achievement was alarming. Many feared that Soviet advances in rocket technology could also translate into military superiority. The space race had begun. The competition intensified throughout the 1960s. Both superpowers invested enormous resources into scientific research, missile development, and space exploration. In 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into space. The achievement was celebrated across the communist world. In response, President John F. Kennedy announced an ambitious goal, landing a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Meanwhile, tensions in Europe continued to rise. Millions of East Germans were fleeing to the west through Berlin. To stop the flow, the Soviet-backed East German government constructed the Berlin Wall in 1961. Families were separated overnight. Armed guards patrolled the border, and escape attempts often ended in tragedy. The wall became the most powerful symbol of the Cold War and the division of Europe. Just 1 year later, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. In 1962, American reconnaissance aircraft discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, only 90 miles from the coast of Florida. President Kennedy responded by imposing a naval blockade around the island. For 13 days, the world watched as the United States and Soviet Union stood on the brink of catastrophe. A single mistake could have triggered a nuclear war capable of killing millions. Fortunately, both sides ultimately agreed to compromise. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev removed the missiles from Cuba, while the United States pledged not to invade the island. The crisis ended peacefully, but it revealed how dangerous the Cold War had become. For decades, the rivalry between the two superpowers would continue to shape global politics, influencing conflicts in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Africa, Latin America, and beyond. Yet despite countless crises and moments of tension, the Cold War never erupted into direct war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Instead, it remained a conflict defined by deterrence, competition, and the constant fear of nuclear destruction. It was a struggle that transformed the modern world and left a legacy that continues to influence international relations even today.